You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at KeeleyCompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the #1 national best-selling author of the book On Fire. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, and he's the host of the Live Inspired podcast. John interviews extraordinary individuals on their life story so that you can wake up from accidental living and more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Israa Nasir is our guest today. She is a psychotherapist. She's a speaker, a writer, and the founder of WellGuide. That's an online community making mental health education more reliable, more relatable, and more accessible for more people. Her work has been featured in Forbes, in Time, in the Harvard Business Review, and her new book, it's called Toxic Productivity. It's a powerful guide for anyone looking to reclaim their time and emotional energy in a world constantly asking for more of both. Today, Israa joins us to share how her own pursuit of achievement nearly cost her the things that mattered most. She opens up about growing up between cultures. She moved around a lot as a child, not only around a state, but as you'll hear, around the world. How her family's story shaped her understanding of success. And then the moment she realized she needed to make a change in her journey forward. It's an awesome story. We also explore the concept of toxic productivity, why so many of us fall into it, and what it actually takes to break free from it. My friends, if you have ever felt guilty for resting, struggled to say no, or questioned your worth when you're not doing enough, this conversation today is for you. You will leave with practical tools to quiet your inner critic and make space for joy and rest, to also define what success looks like on your terms. So without waiting any longer, let me loop her into the conversation. She is my friend and now yours, Israa Nasir. Israa, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation.
Well, I've already laughed and begun to cry a little bit as we're talking about what motivates us to do the work that we do. When you bump into someone randomly, maybe grabbing a cup of tea, groceries, whatever it might be, and you introduce yourself and they say, Israa, what do you do? How do you answer that?
Gosh, if someone asks me, I'm often kind of thinking about, what is motivating them and in what context I'm being asked. But if you were to just kind of generally ask what I do a lot of different things. So I wear a lot of different hats. I'm a therapist, I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, I create content on social media, I do public speaking and workshops, and they all feel very different. But the core theme that connects all of the things that I do, and this is kind of like my personal mission in life as well, is to equip people with mental health education, knowledge, awareness, concepts, frameworks, so that they can make changes in their day-to-day life as a preventative measure to having like a mental health crisis. Now, when I say mental health crisis, I don't just mean a mental illness. I mean burnout. I mean relationship breakdown. I mean, struggling with really low self-esteem. I've been a therapist for 10 years, and the number of times I've sat back with a client and just reflected to myself and thought, if only they knew certain things before, right? And I think the way our system is set up, it gatekeeps a lot of this information. So I really strive in everything that I do that people get access to this information and are able to make changes in their day-to-day life.
Why would we gatekeep information that's life-giving?
I think that, historically, a lot of these concepts fell under psychology broadly. And that was always gate kept behind the paywall of insurance, right? And so if we have this information democratized, then people are not going to go through the methods of insurance systems and paying for the service and all of that, right? So there's that aspect. The second more powerful aspect is the stigma around mental health. It's only in the last 10 years that even in North America, we are openly talking about mental health, right? And talking about emotional regulation, talking about relational breakdown. Everything was behind closed doors. So the emotional foundation of those things was also behind closed doors. And this move to destigmatize mental health involves breaking down those barriers.
So I've been thinking about your past, this journey that has led you to where you are today and the work that you're doing, and how, in so many regards, radically different it is than my journey. On Sunday night, my wife and I brought dinner out to my mom. She's in this house that she's been in for the last 52 years.
Wow.
She was with the same guy for 64 years. It's just like, boom, they put their roots down and they just stayed. And then you and this wild journey that you've learned so much along the way. You're a global citizen. So would you go back in time a little bit from the practice you're doing today and the speeches that you're delivering today and the work you're doing today and give us a snapshot of your childhood?
So I'm ethnically Pakistani. My parents are Pakistani as well. I was born there, but I grew up in the Middle East because my parents had moved there in the 70s. So I was born in Pakistan because my mom wanted to be with her mom when she was in the postpartum stage. I grew up in Saudi Arabia up until I was 13 and lived in this like expat bubble where it's a very like being an expat is a very interesting identity formation experience when you're younger because there is no primary dominant group because everyone is from everywhere else in the world and they're in this third place, and that's why I call myself a third culture kid because you're straddling multiple cultures. And I grew in parallel to Middle Eastern culture, but also very westernized as well, because my dad worked at the American Embassy. So it was like, just kind of borrowing from all different types of cultures. I went to like a British Bengali school. So there's like that element. I had South African teachers. So like there was this kind of like big mosaic of cultural experiences. And then I moved to Canada, Toronto, when I was 13. And that's really where I realized that there is a dominant group and then you don't belong to that dominant group, right? Because that was like the biggest cultural shift for me, even though I had seen the movies and I had watched Full House and like all those things. So it took me like 3 months to really kickstart into Canadian culture. So I, went to school there, did my undergrad there, and then I moved to New York, where I live now. That's why I call myself like I'm like an immigrant 3 times over in different places. And New York is home for now, but I don't imagine leaving New York. I really love it, but you never say never. You never know where life will take you.
Well, it's taken you all over the world twice. So
Yeah.
welcome home currently to New York. I want to hear a little bit about your dad. Tell me about your father's character and what did you learn from him?
Oh, wow. Nobody has ever asked me this question. I think this is such an interesting question. What did I learn from my father? So my dad, essentially, he moved at probably his like late 20s to Saudi Arabia. He had just gotten engaged to my mom. He grew up in a war time in 71 between East and West Pakistan. And that war was a war of cultural identity. It was a war of language. And so it's interesting, this like theme of identity formation and travel and movement it's very strong and present in my family. But what I learned from him is there's only one way to go, which is the way towards solutions. He's a very solution oriented guy. He's very gentle and caring, but it's always trying to make sure that you don't feel victimized by your circumstances. I think that's something that I've learned from him. And he's always looking for an opportunity to empower others and has often found a lot of peace and contentment and purpose in that for his own life.
Well, I ask about your dad because I feel like I know a little bit more about your mother. You've shared her story several different times on various podcasts and whispers of it in the book. Uh, your mother loved productivity, it seems. It seems like she was always moving and grooving, making lists and getting things done.
Mhm. Yeah, so both my parents are like that, but I think what's interesting in the difference between them is my mom is more the archetype of the person who I'm speaking to in the book, which is emotions don't matter. Productivity matters. Like, don't feel sad, don't feel shame, just ignore all of that. Just move ahead. Here's what you got to do. What's the next step? And let's move, let's move, let's move, right? Very achievement oriented, very goal oriented, very driven, definitely somebody who can get things done, but there is this like emotional vacuum. She's a very kind and loving parent, but in her, it's like everything is mission driven. And that's
Yeah.
what's different about my dad is like, he's definitely the same in that way. And they get along very well because of that, but he will make space for emotions. Like he will make space for difficulty and challenge. And he will say, it's okay that you're sad, or it's okay that you feel embarrassed. Whereas my mom is like, nah, let's move on.
Well, it takes two to tango, so both the yin and the yang. And as you're observing your parents and being guided as they draw you forward by the hand, what are you learning about success and values and worth from mom and dad?
I am learning that success is survival. Those are the stories that I grew up around forever. Like my parents have never been shy about sharing their experiences of what happened in the war with them. And we're very familiar with how they got out. And so, overnight they became internally displaced refugees, which I talked about. But success was survival. Like
Yeah.
they were able to get out of there. They were able to circumvent the refugee camps because they spoke English, because they were able to, move and leave the country and move ahead. So for the longest time, even though I did not grow up in that strife, I grew up very privileged, like I have to say, right? But for the longest time, I had internalized the message that there is no other option
Mm.
except success. And success is what is predefined, predetermined for me. And that's where I'm going to find my happiness, and nothing else matters.
Tell me
And
what that means. So what is their definition of success, either for themselves or for you?
but the definition for success for me that my parents have is to move through the script, the life script, right? Is to move through it on time, of like school, postgraduate, like marriage, children, home ownership. Like they believe in the American dream, if you will, right? Entrepreneurship is risky. You need to like work and make your way up the corporate ladder, like because those are the things that gave them stability. So it's less about, optics. It's less about what are other people going to think if you don't do it. It's
Yeah.
really that fear that things can be taken away from you, that scarcity mindset. And so if you collect all the achievements, you will be preserved from like instability. And so I think like that's kind of what they're always looking for is stability. And one thing my mom always told me, she was like, education is the most important thing for girls because that's the one thing no one can take away, no matter what happens, no matter where you go in the world. And so like there's a lot of fear around things being taken away. So if you can bolster yourself and you have those like, what are those
Mm.
ship ballasts that hold the ship, you
Yeah.
know? So then you'll be fine.
You, as you're paying attention to their wisdom, are growing up. You want to become at one point a marine biologist.
Yeah.
Why'd you pivot away from that to ultimately what you chose?
It's so interesting, like the way chance works. I was studying environmental studies, and by the time I hit second year, there was like a breadth requirement where you had to take certain electives. And one of the electives you had to take was environmental psychology,
Hmm.
which was, how do we encourage people to change behaviors? Like the whole course was around encouraging people to recycle. But in order to learn human behavior, we started learning a little about like behavior theory, right? And then like, so as I took that, the professor was this like incredibly enthusiastic man. I think in like a different life, he would be like an incredible cult leader. Like he was just so excited, and he had recruited a bunch of students to join this organization called the Unstoppable Snowball, which I was a part of as well. And so like there was all this like energy around like changing behavior and feeling really empowered by it. So he recommended I take more psychology courses because he's like, if we need conservation to happen, we need to get into people's minds. And so I started taking other psychology courses, and I became so interested in it, like cognitive psych, neuropsych, abnormal psych. that by the time I graduated, I had collected enough credits to have a double major in psychology and environmental science. But by then, I became really interested in human behavior,
Yeah.
and changing behavior. And, how do we actually like equip people to live good, healthy lives? So like that mission of like environmental conservation expanded to like just helping people feel more fulfilled in their lives. So that's why I pursued a master's in counseling. And I mean, I'm still extremely passionate about environmental conservation.
Going through all the training, because it's years long, and then the certificates afterwards, and it's just it's obviously work. As you're looking ahead toward the ultimate impact you can make, what's the goal?
I mean, this is going to sound so cliche, but I do think
Right.
that, especially in today's world, I think this is so relevant, is making sure that people are able to hold on to optimism and hope when things are challenging, because things will inevitably be challenging, right? What ends up happening is if we don't know how to understand our emotions, if we cannot recognize difficult emotions, we very quickly lose hope in the face of difficult emotions. Oh, I'll never feel happy again. I'm
Right.
always anxious, right? This like very concrete, hopeless perspective, which I'm sure you can speak to a lot about, right? Is like the power of shifting the perspective from feeling disempowered to feeling empowered in the same circumstance. So like that really is the core of why I think people should know these things. Is there is always something that you can shift, that but you need to
Right.
first believe that it's possible. And I've always found a lot of personal hope in the work of like existential psychologists and writers, specifically like Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks a lot about this, right? It's like, how do you find hope in the most extremely hopeless circumstance, like the Holocaust concentration camp? Like, why were some people able to survive it and others were not? And that is like an existential question, but it's a psychological question as well.
Right.
And so that's my ultimate mission.
You're now working in this path at scale, like
Mhm.
impacting tens of thousands of lives around the country and around the world. But that work began one to one, like one patient, one client at a time. I spent 3 years as a hospital chaplain
Mhm.
and would walk into these rooms. And the job for chaplains not to like evangelize, it's just to love. It's to be there with people in the mess and love them through it. And
Mhm.
I loved it, but occasionally in these visits, I would feel like, gosh, first of all, I can't believe they're sharing this stuff with me, this private stuff about their life. And secondly, and I don't know what to do with it.
Mhm.
So as a young person, as you are now working with individuals, were you in awe of the honor of walking with people through struggle, through life? And secondly, were there visits where you're like, man, I don't know if I'm equipped to fully guide this person through what they're dealing with?
I think like in my first couple of years of being a one-on-one therapist, I did not have the emotional capacity to be in awe because I felt so strongly to help them. So I couldn't like I didn't have that distance, and I think that's something I grew into with supervision from like my mentors and other therapists, and now where I am 10 years later. But in the beginning, I think on the first 2 years I was just like, I gotta help, I gotta find a way, there has to be a solution, because I was a therapist but in like a community setting. So community setting therapists are way more action oriented, right? Like if someone is coming to you with a problem, like you're not just saying, hey, let's just process your feelings. It's okay, like I'm going to help you find a social agency that can help you with this addiction, or I'm going to go to the psychiatrist appointment with you so that you have advocacy in session. So I was like a community support therapist. So I was living alongside people. Like I would meet them in their homes. I would meet them in coffee shops if they didn't have the bus fare to come to an office, right?
Right.
So it was really hard for me to separate like my action from the impact it was having on their lives. And it was, truthfully, it was a very overwhelming job for someone who had just graduated, but I'm grateful for it because it gave me like a learning that I just didn't have access to this world before, and so I learned so much and I grew a lot.
You did that for almost a decade. When did you begin shifting to imagining what it could look like with tech startups and scaling this impact using technology?
Probably like year 5. year 5 of after graduating and working and all that stuff is when I started to see, because I was working in community, I started to see like the structural issues that repeated themselves over and over in people's different situations. Like families would come from completely different things, and you whittle it down and it's like, oh, it's the same structural barriers, the same structural issue. And I didn't really want to go the policy route, even though like I love talking and I love writing, and those are important skills. It's very bureaucratic. It's very red tape. You have to jump through years and years of hoops to make an impact. Right. And that's what I felt when I was briefly working in a nonprofit. Like, just to make the smallest impact, it had to go through 17 layers of bureaucracy in 2 years. Right. And everything is grant oriented. And so then I started thinking about like, where are people making more impact? And I discovered social impact work by chance on my 27th, 26th birthday, something like that. And I just went to like this hackathon that was a business case pitching competition. And I just pitched an idea for maternal mental health using like a mobile app. And I ended up winning it. And that's just pivoted my journey completely. I learned about startup, venture capital, social impact, tech startups for digital health. It just changed my entire life.
So let's talk about the change, because sometimes in order to take the next step forward, you got to fall back a few. So let me tell you a few things that you're doing. Here we go. You find yourself as a therapist, working with a tech startup, writing a book, married, you're exercising, you're traveling, you're going out 7 nights a week.
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
Oh my gosh, what could go right in a situation like that? That's kind of where like that mentality of like success looks like a very finite thing comes into play, that the one that I kind of learned from my parents. And it doesn't have room for any kind of vulnerability. I did not allow any vulnerability. Like, success in this mindset does not have any vulnerability. I don't need to rest. I don't need a break. I can do everything. I don't need time off. I don't need to buffer any time between meetings or going out. Like, I can go to 4 parties in a night, right? There's no vulnerability because there's this idea that everything is possible. So I'm doing all of these things, and I'm doing it because I've been told by the world that if I check all the boxes, I'm going to be happy.
Right.
But what ended up happening was the complete opposite, in that I started questioning like if I could ever achieve happiness, because I was doing so much. I was giving in every avenue, but I wasn't feeling really happy about it. And then, of course, like, I'm a therapist, so I turned that lens on myself, and I was like, let me rule out any anxiety or depression or whatever. And I did a screening, and I talked to my doctors and like all that stuff. And when that didn't actually give me a reason for feeling unhappy, I realized that it was something in my external environment, that it was something that I was doing, I was engaging in, I was around, that needed to change. But honestly, that whole change took like 2.5 years.
Right.
It wasn't like one day I was like, oh, I'm going to change my life, because vulnerability for high achievers is like, it cannot ever come to the surface. So just even trying to invite that and be like, oh, I'm tired, or I'm going to say no to this, or I don't really like being around this person. Like, it's just not permission that we give ourselves. And so it's very dehumanizing in one way.
I think in a significant way, and it's extraordinarily common. When did the term toxic productivity begin showing up in your life?
Probably in 2021. The pandemic, everybody was, doing their own version of coping in the pandemic. And I definitely did lean into like productivity as coping. I was on my own for like about the first 3.5 months, at the peak of New York being like the mess that it was, like April 2020 to, the summer.
By the
And
way, I read that, and I would have lost my mind. I can't imagine what life would have been like 3.5 months cut off from the world,
yeah,
living in chaos.
chaos, like BLM protests were happening, riot police were like on my street corner every single day, because I lived right off of Fifth Avenue. Morgue trucks were driving by. It was just, if you think about it, I was like, wow, this is so wild. And I was like, literally just like a 31-year-old baby trying to figure it out. So I turned to productivity as coping. And while there's a lot of positive things that came out with that, there was also like this realization that this is not working anymore. Like something needs to change. And I think the disconnection from the world gave me some privacy to go into my vulnerability, to allow myself to even reflect and think about, oh, wait, these are the things that need to change. So this phrase of toxic productivity came out of some of those journals from that time that I made into a newsletter and sent out to the world, which eventually caught the eye of my publisher.
What is toxic productivity?
Toxic productivity is the pressure that we have internalized to constantly be doing something, even when it's harming our well-being. And it's not about being ambitious. It's about believing that your self-worth, the value you bring to the world, is tied directly to the achievements that you bring forward. And that creates the perfect environment to becoming unwell.
I was going to ask you about that. So tell me why that is.
Well, I mean, there's like a couple of reasons. One is the culture that we live in, like broader, North American capitalism, is that, you are only as valuable as you output, right? Like as you produce, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in your personal relationships. That's the predominant culture that we're in right now, 80s onwards. It wasn't always like this. And then the 90s, early 2000s, like hustle and grind, sleep when you're dead, that culture really raised a whole generation of people who believe that we live in a meritocracy, that your merits give you success, but we all know that that's not true, right? It's false. And so that's one reason. Another is the way you were raised. There are some cultures that value achievement more than other cultures. It depends on your family background. Like for me, right? Achievement, productivity is a big part of my family's narrative. So therefore, it's a big part of my personal narrative. So that's kind of why it happens. And recently, in the last 12 years, it has amplified even more because of the work-life balance kind of blurring because of technology. We can check work email anywhere immediately. Who's a better worker exists, right? If you don't check your work over vacation and the other person is, and you both have the same phones, one person is slacking and the other isn't. So it's kind of changed the rules. And social media has amplified comparison, and we have fallen deeper into the hole of wanting to feel better about ourselves by doing the things that other people are doing.
Israa, how do you know when it's healthy ambition versus destructive daily decisions?
Yeah.
Like, how do I know if I'm just climbing up, man? I'm just pulling up. I'm raising 4 kids, staying married, trying to take care of my parents, doing the thing versus, no, this is destructive to the very things you claim as being important to you.
2 things. One is if it's coming at the cost of your well-being, right? You mentioned you have children. Now, if your kids are, let's say, involved in a lot of after-school activities, but that's impacting their sleep quality, like, is that really beneficial to them? Like them doing 4 different after-school activities, is that worth the lack of sleep that is so integral to our growing children and human beings in general, but specifically for growing kids, right? So that kind of question is like, is this push towards the achievement marker, like the thing that you've set as the goal, is it harming your well-being or enhancing it, right? Over a long span of time. We all have seasons where we're hustling, where yes, you have to work through lunch to meet a deadline. But if that's the rule to your life and not the exception, and you're constantly deprioritizing your well-being in face of ambition, then that's crossed the threshold of being healthy into unhealthy. The second is intention, right? Where did this ambition come from? What is the productivity marker that you believe in? Like, what is it and why is it important to you, right? I have worked with so many super high achieving individuals who at like 32 to 35 cannot answer the question as to why they even pursued law. Why did they become a doctor? And yet they're on the treadmill doing the things like you just described, right? So I think like understanding the intention is also really important. A lot of times we pursue things because we want to look good for other people. Is that really ambition? Right? A lot of times we want to have a salary because we want to have the house because somebody else also has it in the group of friends. Some other family is vacationing in Hawaii every year. So like now you want to keep up with that. Like, is that ambition? Like, where is that coming from? So I think intention is the second thing that's really important to know.
All right, well, we're going to dive into it now with some of your own words coming back at you. So productivity, this is you writing, doesn't just refer to work though. All domains of life have been wrapped with this productivity-oriented mindset.
Yes, 100%. This is like the hill I put my flag on. And the reason I say this is because up until like 2019, the term burnout was predominantly used for workplace burnout. The foundational literature of research on burnout comes from workplace burnout, right? So we all believe that you can only be burnt out at work. And if you're feeling any other emotion outside in your life, that's because of you. That's because of your relationship, right? There's a personal deficiency there. The reason I think it's so important to think about productivity as cross-domain is because burnout is cross-domain. The most recent research around 2020 onwards is showing that we can be burnt out as parents. We can be burnt out in our romantic relationships. We can be burnt out as caregivers to like elders or, younger individuals in your life or whoever. And that's significant to know because how you deal with it then changes, right? When we are bringing this like achievement-oriented mindset to our romantic relationship, then we are putting this toxic productivity framework on romance, and we're treating romance as a checklist that we have to move through as milestones. And if I don't have this at 25 and my friends do, then I'm not good enough. If they don't propose to me by 30 and the other friends are all married, then I'm not good enough, right? So we start creating this like hierarchy of who belongs and who is good enough in every area of our life. But if we don't recognize that as like a framework, then we'll think that there's either something wrong with us or the other person.
Productivity, you write, isn't about managing time. It's actually more about your emotions. That was surprising to me. Tell me what that means.
That is one of like the core reasons I wrote the book, because when I was struggling with all my things and I was doing everything and I wasn't feeling really happy, you go to bookstores and you look at what's out there to help you, right? And what I noticed is anything that was like productivity related was all habit related. Everything was like, change this habit, build this framework, right? But I knew that I could do all of those things and I still wasn't going to feel happy because I also worked with people who did all of the things and they were not feeling happy. And in therapy, all you're doing is unpacking difficult emotions. So I know that our emotions have a very significant impact on our choices, right? And unless we resolve the emotions that are unresolved, our choices will always reflect an unresolved emotion. So
that's good. So to unpack that, what do we do then?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to do is to even like for me, I was like, oh, I'm not a vulnerable person. I'm never tired. I don't have shame. I don't feel guilty. But I was operating from all of those frameworks. And so in order to unpack this, we have to recognize the unresolved emotions that are driving the car that we are in. If you are always operating from a place of fear of missing out, then the underlying emotion in there is like scarcity oriented. You're never making a decision from a place of empowerment if you're always afraid that someone else is going to get the thing. You're never making a decision from a place of empowerment if you're always afraid that someone's going to reject you if you make a mistake. That's perfectionism, right? So like, how can we make decisions that are empowered instead of reactive to unresolved emotions? So we have to recognize what is the primary driver for us. Right? For me, a very strong primary driver around productivity was guilt. Right? My parents have done so much. They went through all these things. They taught me how to like be resilient. And if I don't do this, then was their sacrifice worth it? Right? So that guilt used to drive me a lot. And for other people, it can be shame. For other people, it can be a very strong inner critic. For others, it's a fear of rejection, right? I need to fit in with my friends. I need to stay on the timeline. So we need to know these emotions so that we can not be unhealthy in our productivity.
You write and speak quite a bit about the inner critic. How do you either begin silencing that critic who just keeps telling you, whether through whispers or roars, that you're not enough and never will be? Or how do you begin changing the tape that you're listening to?
First, you have to recognize when the inner critic comes up. I think a lot of us like kind of believe that it's like always there, but there are certain situations, certain instances, certain people who will activate that more for you. And kind of exploring that, getting curious, understanding like what about this situation brings this up for me is the key to unlocking that volume button. So the inner critic's like volume button is behind like a vault. And in order to turn it down, you have to first unlock it. And in order to unlock it, you have to know when it comes up and essentially like whose voice is it? Because the second mistake people make is, and I mean, we're with our thoughts all day. So we believe that these thoughts are ours. But if you were to do an exercise of externalizing your inner critic, you would probably recognize a person in your past who says this kind of stuff, or someone like an amalgamation of experiences, right? So like the first step is awareness to any kind of growth. So that's the awareness piece of the inner critic. Once you've unlocked it, the biggest mistake people make is they want to silence the inner critic immediately. But true growth is not thriving in the absence of the trigger. True growth is thriving in spite of the trigger. So the trigger might never go away. We have to kind of be able to manage it better. So turning the volume down of the inner critic or turning the volume up of the other voices, the coach, the gentle, the encourager, whatever, like, motivates you.
Right.
It's a journey. I just want to say, like I said so much and someone's listening and they're like, oh my gosh, this is like 7 steps too many. This is a journey that people have to take for like at least a year of getting to know themselves. And that to me is very beautiful, because as long as we're alive, we're getting to know ourselves.
So you speak to a whole lot of folks who live over in the perfectionism world. They are always striving, always racing. And one of the things you challenge those individuals to do is to embrace mediocrity.
Yeah.
Talk about that because that is so countercultural. Do
It is.
okay work, please.
Yeah. Yeah. And I came across this realization myself because I'm not necessarily like a perfectionist in every way, but I definitely have very high standards and everything needs to be exceptional if I do it. When I invite people into mediocrity is not to say to live a midlife and to not have goals. Like that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is be more discerning about what actually deserves your perfection, deserves your 100%, and which things can be just good enough. Because when we give equally to everything, it's like a loss. It's a net loss for us. But if we can kind of decipher the pieces that deserve the 100%, the perfection, and we decide, okay, these things don't, we actually do ourselves a favor because we can then put all that energy into the things that do deserve it. So like a really good example is if you're somebody who loves hosting and you love having friends over, gathering at your place, instead of like running yourself to the ground, trying to make every element of the dinner perfect, right at the top of that dinner party, make a list of things that absolutely need to be perfect, right? Quality of the food you're serving. Like for me, quality of the food I'm serving, right? Very warm atmosphere and dietary restrictions. Like I want to, that's really important to me. The other things like the tablescape, dessert, like those things are not that important to me. So they can get my average attention. But the things that really matter to me, I can free up time to really give my 100%. And that way you get to be a gracious host. That way, when you open the door, you're not frazzled for your guests. You can really invite them into your space. When we're trying to do too much and trying to do all of it perfectly, we are not present and we're frazzled, we're overwhelmed. It's not a good experience for anyone.
So it's hard to let go of that because a whole lot of folks feel like they're not enough if they don't, in your example, set the table just perfectly.
Yeah.
Or from a previous example you gave, have 4 activities for their kids after school each day so that those children one day can be truly successful in life.
Mhm.
So speak to this idea of where value and worth comes from.
We live in this world that has constantly defined our value for us. Irrespective of who you are, people are always telling you 30 under 30, like top 20 under 20, be married by 30, blah, 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 right? So I think I would invite people to take a step back, take a month or two to just reflect on everything that they are doing and really reflect and consider whether it elevates their value, whether it actually makes you feel better, whether it makes you feel like you belong. Like, I think we cannot do this work until we have the awareness of our own functioning, right? And all of us, I think, are operating on some level of autopilot. We're just reactive to our lives. We do the things other people demand of us. And then we kind of come to like the golden years, if you will, and question our purpose. And you see the media depictions of the midlife crisis, right? It's all because we're all trying to come back to ourselves because that has been taken away from us. So if you feel like this idea of being mediocre in some areas of your life gives you like a visceral reaction, then I invite you to take the next 2 months to just reflect on everything that you're doing, everything you've committed to, and then make a list and understand if it actually brings you value, it brings you joy, if it actually connects with your core mission in life. You know, a lot of us don't really understand why we're living. Because, like you just said, you know, I've got the wife, the kid, the house, like blah, 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 and I'm just going through it. I'm doing the thing. But, like, what is a value driver behind all of those things for you? Connection, community, right? Like, maybe that's what binds all of those things together. But if you don't know that, you're just going to live a disparate life forever, right? So the invitation is not always to disregard the things you're doing. The invitation is to be intentional and know why you're doing it.
So to me, what you're talking about there is so core to any version of a truly successful life. Like how can you ultimately achieve success if it's not been defined by you? Like how is there any hope of getting there?
Mhm.
So in this world that is so busy, and when we're not busy, we're busy pretending like we're busy with technology in our hands.
Yeah.
What is your encouragement to help our listeners and my friends slow down so they can recognize who they really are, what really matters, and where they really, really want to go next?
I'll say two things. First is so rogue that people always are like, how is this your answer to this question? But if you're really trying to understand like what you're saying, I think a lot of the answers are found in stillness or creativity. So when someone I'm working with is like so overwhelmed with life and they just feel like they have to change everything and nothing is working and you know they're struggling, I always ask them to see if they can find time once every 2 weeks to begin with, then once a week if you can, 20 minutes to pick up a creative hobby. Because this is like a lifelong pursuit. When you pick up a creative hobby, and it can be anything, right? It allows your mind to decompress a little. So you can go into the places that require your curiosity, right? That require you to lean inwards instead of lean out. What happens is we are overwhelmed, we are busy, we're like, what is the meaning of life? We start leaning out, we start externalizing. I need to get rid of this. I need to break up with that person. I need to do more. I need to learn like a new language, right? So we think that we can break out of this by doing more. But actually, to break out of this is you have to start feeling more. And you can't do that if you're overfunctioning. So a creative hobby allows you to tap into very basic, universal human experiences, which is imagination and joy. Children right out of the womb are imagining things and they're being joyful. That's like the base human state. We have gone so far away from that as a people. And so I like to kind of tell people this is like, let's come back 15 minutes of a creative hobby once a week, 30 minutes once every 2 weeks. See how you can fold that into your day-to-day life. I think that that has so much power. It's
Yeah.
so underrated. Like if you think about like American society prior to the 60s, sure, there was a lot going on at that time about politics that we are not going to get into that has nothing to do with this part of the conversation. But there was a broader sense of connection and community. People were involved in their church or after school, like community hubs. There was a sense of togetherness, and there was people had hobbies, right? You probably ask anybody who was alive in the 60s as an adult, they had some kind of hobby, right? People would sit by the radio and listen to records that had just come out and all that stuff, right? And I'm not idealizing the past. What I'm saying is there is a neurological impact on our brain when we engage in creative hobbies. We don't do that anymore. We monetize our hobbies. We create Instagram accounts about it. We put it up for sale on Etsy. We compare it to other people. So we've kind of taken away the benefit. We just do the action. I think that's the thing, is I would invite people to bring some downtime, understimulated, when you're not making any decisions, doing something creative. It can be as simple as a puzzle. Like, it doesn't have to be anything complicated.
You enjoy puzzles and sandcastles. We'll spend no time on either right now, but I appreciate your willingness to build and destroy both.
Yeah.
How is modern technology negatively affecting our mental health today?
It's kind of like impacting our neural network in that certain neural net pathways are being overutilized, short processing loop, right? Like the average attention span in the US right now is 47 seconds. And so short neural pathways are like overworked, so we're getting super frazzled. But long form, deep thinking, contextual thinking, deductive reasoning, because people don't engage with it as much anymore, that's being pruned away. People don't read long form articles anymore. They want to get a snapshot on TikTok. Somebody breaks down the article for them in 10 seconds, right? We just read headlines. People don't read articles because of paywalls and all those things. And so that is a huge negative impact on our brain, because we cannot do deep thinking as much anymore. We can't do context thinking. It has made people very, what about me? I create content every single day on Instagram, and inevitably every single day, someone's like, this doesn't apply to me. What about me? What about my experience? What about that? And I'm like, one post cannot encapsulate that. You have to do the 1+1 is 2 thinking for yourself. So it's creating a lack of empathy between people, not to be very existential, but because we cannot do this type of long, deep thinking anymore, we cannot be empathetic towards the other. That's why we're so divisive. Everything is short. Everything is black and white. Everything is on 2 different sides. And so you can see this like fabric of society is like kind of fraying. We need to kind of bring it back together.
So we're about near the end of our conversation. What's one thing, as our listeners are getting ready to move into their days and lives after this podcast, they can either do or not do so they can be a little bit maybe less productive, but also more joyful?
Yes. I love the concept of permission slips. So you can build a daily practice either in the morning or in the evening to give yourself a permission slip for something that you are struggling with. So a permission slip that I give myself in the morning is I allow myself, literally, I say this to myself, I'm not going to check my work email until after breakfast. Like, I give myself permission because it primes me to not do that, because that's not good for your mental health. So you can give yourself a permission slip of some kind that allows you a little bit of a break. And the second thing I'll say is we talked about, but I'll summarize it. I call it the 80-20 rule, is tell yourself that 80% of the time, I'm going to do the thing at my best. Like 80% of the time, I'm going to go to the gym. 80% of the time, I'm going to eat healthy. 80% of the time, I'll have good sleep. 20% leave to be average, to be mid, to be messy or inconsistent, because that gives you flexibility.
Great advice. Where can we learn more about the work you're doing?
Everything you want to learn about, I'm saying, is on my website. It's israhnasir.com. If you're interested in like daily things that I'm sharing on Instagram, I'm pretty active there, and I share a lot of resources. So that's at well.guide on Instagram.
Israa, we wrap every one of our conversations with our almost 800 friends with 7 questions. They're called the Live Inspired 7. So grab your tea, take a swig. Let's roll.
Is it a rapid fire?
It is rapid fire.
Hey, let's go.
What's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl. Yeah.
What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed when you were a little girl, but you wish you exhibited a little bit more so today?
Whimsy. It was
Wow.
very whimsical.
That's a great answer. If your home caught fire and all living things and people are out, but you have an opportunity of running back in and grabbing one item, what one physical thing would you grab?
I think like the heirloom jewelry pieces my parents gave me because they're familial and generational.
If you could sit on a bench and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
Oh my gosh. I'm really into Stanley Tucci's food world right nowadays. So it would be that. Yeah.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I ever received was from my dad, who consistently just says that don't worry about what other people think.
What advice do you wish you could go back and whisper your way at age 20?
You don't always have to be moving. Yeah. My journal, I had once written that in stillness is death, just so dramatic. But
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I would say to her, like, just you don't always have to be moving.
Isra, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
I would like my one sentence to be that Isra is a person who cares about things beyond herself.
Israa Nasir, thank you for being a person who cared deeply about things even greater than yourself. Thank you for sharing that journey with us today. It's been a joy to have you on our show.
Thank you so much. This was such a lovely conversation.
My friends, that is Israa Nasir. My name is John O'Leary, and today is our day. What a gift. Live inspired.
Productivity isn't about managing time. It's actually more about your emotions. Unless we resolve the emotions that are unresolved, our choices will always reflect an unresolved emotion. My friends, that is one of the powerful quotes you heard during our conversation today with Israa. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you, I bet you will love the conversation that I had a couple years back with another friend named Tanya Dalton. Tanya is a productivity expert. She's an author. She's a speaker who reminds us that busy does not mean better. She offers a fresh, energizing take on how to do more with less, and not just at work, but in all areas of life. In this conversation, she helps us reframe productivity, clarify what really matters, that's the first step, and make room for what brings us most joy in our lives. You can learn more about becoming more intentional in a world that is coming at us so quickly in episode 106 with episode Tanya Dalton. Or you can just cruise with me right now over to the website. This is the mothership, baby. We keep everything here, including all of our podcasts, updates on the film, and the work we do in the community. Where is that site, you ask? Well, it's at johnolearyinspires.com. And you can learn more about the podcast by doing /podcast. One more time, johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. We'll have a link in the show notes for Tanya Dalton's episode. Well, family, friends, leaders, servants, I appreciate you tuning in this time and look forward to partying with you next time. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son, Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.